Soon, Eo began believing what the villagers said about Bidemi, and his resentment grew with each passing day. He started spending less time at home, avoiding Bidemi altogether. When he was there, his words cut deep. "Why don't you just leave?" he snapped one evening. "Maybe the bad luck will live with you." Bidemi, though deeply hurt, refused to give up on her marriage. She worked harder, determined to prove her worth to him and the village. But no matter what she did, the cloud of misfortune followed her. Even the few customers who came to her started to dwindle. The villagers' cruel taunts worsened their misery. "That wench," they whispered as Bidemi walked by. "She touched my neighbor's child's hair, and the child fell ill the next day." Others laughed openly at Eo. From businessman to bush clearer, they jeered. Who would have thought? The humiliation weighed heavily on Eo. He no longer had the energy to defend himself. Instead, he directed his anger at Bidemi. "This is all your fault," he would yell, slamming his machete onto the ground after a long day of work. "If I hadn't married you, my life wouldn't have turned into this disaster." Bidemi, tears streaming down her face, could only sit silently. She had no strength left to argue. She spent her days working tirelessly, trying to scrape together enough to keep them alive. Even when Eo lashed out at her, she didn't blame him entirely. She knew the weight of their suffering was breaking them both. Desperate, Bidemi visited a well-known pastor. He was a tall man with a booming voice that seemed to command attention. The villagers often spoke of his supposed miracles and how he could cure any illness or misfortune. When Bidemi arrived at his small church, she was greeted by a group of women in brightly colored dresses who assured her that Pastor Olamide could fix anything. They led her into a dimly lit room, where the pastor was waiting, sitting behind a large wooden desk. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Oh, my dear sister," Pastor Olamide said in a deep, reassuring tone. "I have heard of your troubles. The spirits are angry with you. But fear not. I will perform the miracle you need." Bidemi felt a flicker of hope, but a nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What if this is just another scam? She quickly pushed the thought aside, desperate for a solution. Pastor Olamide laid his hands on her forehead and began chanting loudly. His voice echoed through the small room, and Bidemi's heart raced. She had heard about spiritual healing in the village, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of the experience. The pastor's voice grew louder with each chant, filling the air with tension. Finally, he stopped and smiled at her. "I have seen the root of your problem, my child," he said. "You have offended an elder in your family. This is the source of your curse. We must perform a special cleansing ritual to free you from this spiritual burden." Bidemi's heart sank. She had no idea who this elder could be, but Pastor Olamide assured her he could resolve it. "All we need is a prayer fee," he continued, his eyes glinting. "It's for the supplies, the candles, the oils, and the goat. The ritual will cost you 50,000 naira. Bidemi hesitated but was desperate. With trembling hands, she handed over the money, clinging to the hope that this might finally end her suffering. The pastor performed the ceremony, chanting and burning incense as the ritual unfolded. But afterward, nothing changed. Her home remained plagued with misfortunes, and the burden she carried only seemed heavier. Her problems appeared to have grown stronger, not weaker. Days passed, and with no relief, Bidemi decided to try another pastor. This time, she went to Pastor Kofi, a man famous for his dramatic prayers. He claimed to have the power to expose hidden enemies, and many believed his spiritual warfare could conquer any evil force. Desperate and with no other options, Bidemi made her way to his church. Pastor Kofi greeted her with a loud, enthusiastic voice. "Oh, you have come to the right place, my sister," he exclaimed, shaking her hand with an exaggerated flourish. I can sense the presence of your enemies, and we will deal with them swiftly. His confidence gave Bidemi a flicker of hope, but it quickly turned into anxiety as the prayer session began. His prayers were loud and forceful, filled with dramatic shouts and commands for deliverance. He circled around her, waving his hands in the air as if battling invisible enemies. I command all evil spirits to leave this woman, he shouted. The powers of darkness have no hold over you. Bidemi closed her eyes and tried to focus, but the constant noise and frantic energy made her feel dizzy and overwhelmed. After what felt like an eternity, Pastor Coffee stopped. It is done, he declared triumphantly. You are free. Your enemies are defeated. Bidemi left the church with a faint glimmer of hope, praying that this time things would change. But that night, she was haunted by nightmares. In her dream, someone was chasing her with a pistol, their intentions clearly hostile. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding with fear. Frustrated and defeated, Bidemi's last hope was crushed. All the pastors, rituals, and the money she had spent had achieved nothing. Her life remained trapped in misery. She had no answers, no solutions, and no one to turn to. Misfortunes had taken over her life, leaving her with nothing but despair. The sun cast long shadows over the village as Mama Shola's laughter echoed down the dusty path. She stood in front of Mama Tinu's small house, her hands planted firmly on her hips, the bright red wrapper she wore gleaming in the sunlight. A group of curious villagers had gathered nearby, eager to witness the unfolding drama. Mama Tinu, Mama Shola began, her tone dripping with mockery, didn't you say your daughter, Bidemi, was the most blessed child in this village? Where is that blessing now, eh? Tell me, where is it? She clapped her hands loudly and burst into laughter, as though she had just told the funniest joke. Mama Tinu sat on a low wooden stool, her gaze fixed on the ground. Her heart burned with humiliation, but she refused to let Mama Shola see her cry. Your daughter, Mama Shola continued, her voice rising for the audience, married a rich man, ABI. And yet, look at her now. Suffering like a common beggar. Meanwhile, my children, my wonderful children, are bringing me nothing but wealth and pride. My daughters have suitors lining up with gold and gifts. My sons are trading in the city, building houses for me. And you, Mama Tinu. You and your daughter are cursed. Mama Tinu raised her head, her eyes blazing with anger. God will not allow you to keep mocking me, Mama Shola, she said, her voice steady. Every storm has an end, and Bidemi's suffering will not last forever. Mama Shola threw her head back and laughed even louder, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. Storm? What storm, Mama Tinu? Face reality. You and your daughter are nothing but bad luck. Everything you touch turns to dust. My children are proof that God has favored me, while you're just a liar who thought she had it all. With that, Mama Shola turned on her heel and walked away, her laughter trailing behind her. The gathered villagers began murmuring, their mocking whispers stinging Mama Tinu like needles. Meanwhile, back at Eo and Bidemi's house, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Eo stormed in, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face dark with frustration. He had just returned from another grueling day of bush clearing, and his anger was about to erupt. Bidemi, he shouted, slamming the door so hard that the walls seemed to tremble. Bidemi, who had been sitting on a mat braiding a customer's hair, quickly got to her feet. Yes, Eo, she answered softly, her voice trembling. Why are you still here? He roared, his voice filling the small room. How many times have I told you to leave? Go back to your mother's house. I don't want you here. Bidemi's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to back down. I won't leave, Eo, she said firmly. I didn't marry you because you were rich. I married you because I love you. And I won't abandon you just because things are hard. Eo's face darkened, and he stepped closer, his voice rising with anger. Love? What kind of love is this? You're a curse, Bidemi. Since the day I married you, my life has fallen apart. Leave me alone. No, Eo, Bidemi replied, her voice steady even as tears rolled down her cheeks. You're not yourself. This isn't you. I know something is wrong, and I won't give up on us. I'll fight for our marriage, even if you won't. Days turned into weeks, and Eo's behavior became increasingly erratic. He grew colder, more distant. When he wasn't ignoring Bidemi, he was shouting at her, his words cutting deep. Sometimes, in his fits of anger, his frustration turned physical, leaving Bidemi with bruises that matched the pain in her heart. Yet, she stayed. In the quiet hours when Eo was away, Bidemi would fall to her knees in prayer. God, please help us, she whispered, her hands clasped tightly. I don't know what's happening, but I trust you to restore my husband and my marriage. While Bidemi fought to hold her life together, Mama Shola basked in the spotlight of her family's success. Her daughters paraded through the village in fine clothes and dazzling jewelry, their heads held high. Suitors came from far and wide, showering them with gifts and competing for their attention. Mama Shola's sons, now successful traders, returned from the city with expensive fabrics, gold trinkets, and bags of provisions, ensuring their mother lived in comfort and pride. The contrast between the two families couldn't have been starker, and the villagers didn't hesitate to remind Bidemi and Mama Tino of it at every turn. Mama Shola made it a habit to flaunt her newfound fortune whenever she crossed paths with Mama Tino. One afternoon, as they passed each other on the village path, Mama Shola stopped, her laughter echoing through the air. Oh, Mama Tinu, she called out, grinning widely. How is your daughter and her useless husband? Still struggling, I suppose. She let out another loud laugh, clearly enjoying herself. Mama Tinu's face burned with shame, but she kept her lips tightly sealed, refusing to respond. Seeing this, Mama Shola leaned in closer, her voice low and laced with venom. You and that daughter of yours are nothing. I told you, didn't I? All that boasting about how blessed she was. Now look at you, reduced to nothing. The villagers, who once wary of Mama Shola's family, now praised them openly. Mama Shola's children are truly blessed, they murmured. She must be doing something right. Mama Shola basked in the admiration, her pride swelling. One day at the market, she spotted Mama Tino and couldn't resist another jab. Maybe if you hadn't been so full of your daughter's success, she whispered smugly, smirking as she leaned over the basket of yams Mama Tino was inspecting, and always bragging about her to make others feel less, she wouldn't be suffering the way she is now. Mama Tino stood still, her heart heavy. She couldn't understand what Mama Shola meant. But you're doing the same thing now, she thought bitterly. What does Bidemi's suffering have to do with anything I said in the past? Still, Mama Tino didn't voice her thoughts. She just wanted peace. Especially when it came to Mama Shola, whose every word seemed designed to rub her family's pain in her face. With a deep breath, Mama Tino silently walked away, her dignity intact despite the shame gnawing at her heart. One evening, as Eo returned from work, he found Bidemi sitting on the floor, her face buried in her hands. I can't do this anymore, she sobbed. I've tried everything, Eo. I've begged, I've pleaded, I've worked until my fingers bled. But nothing changes. Why is this happening to us? Eo, though exhausted and frustrated, sat down beside her. For the first time in months, he softened. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But we have to keep going. Giving up isn't an option. Together, they sat in silence, clinging to the faint hope that their suffering would one day come to an end. It was a hot afternoon, and Bidemi was braiding a customer's hair in her tiny salon when she heard the sound of a car engine stopping outside. She glanced out the window and froze. A sleek black SUV, spotless and shimmering in the sunlight, had parked nearby. Her jaw dropped as a familiar face stepped out, Titi, her childhood best friend. Titi looked radiant, dressed in designer clothes, her fingers adorned with glittering jewelry. She adjusted her sunglasses as she stepped onto the dusty street, her confidence exuding wealth and class. Titi! Bidemi exclaimed, leaving her walk and running toward her. Her excitement bubbled over. It had been years since they last saw each other, and she couldn't believe how stunning Titi looked. Dressed in expensive clothes and stepping confidently, Titi looked like a woman who had it all. Titi glanced at her, surprised but far from enthusiastic. Bidemi, she said flatly, her tone void of the excitement Bidemi expected. Bidemi, unfazed by her coldness, she hugged her tightly, unable to contain her excitement. Titi, it's been ages. Look at you. You're glowing. Where have you been? Titi took a step back, her eyes scanning Bidemi up and down. She frowned slightly, as if shocked by Bidemi's tattered dress and tired appearance. I've been fine, she replied, her tone distant. As Titi adjusted her sunglasses and made to leave, Bidemi noticed a large diamond ring on her finger. Titi! Wait! You're married. You didn't even tell me. I wasn't even invited to your wedding. Why? Titi sighed impatiently, her body language showing clear discomfort. It wasn't a big deal, she said coldly. A lot has changed. Bidemi began firing questions. When did this happen? Where do you live now? How did you get this car? Oh my God, Titi, I've missed you so much. But Titi's demeanor shifted. Her smile faded, and she looked at Bidemi with an unreadable expression. Bidemi, she said softly. I don't have time for this. Bidemi's excitement dimmed as she noticed Titi's tone. Why are you acting like this? She asked, her brows furrowed. Titi simply replied, I am busy, that's all, in a harsh tone. Bidemi felt a lump form in her throat but pushed it aside. Titi, please, don't rush off. Can we talk? Just for a few minutes. Come to my shop. Please, she pleaded. Titi hesitated, looking at her watch, then reluctantly followed Bidemi into the small salon. Inside, Bidemi offered Titi a chair. She couldn't stop herself from gushing. Titi, it's so good to see you. Look at how far you've come. I'm so proud of you. I've missed you so much. Titi angrily interrupted her. Get straight to the point, she said. Bidemi shyly nodded. I really need a favor from you. Titi crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. A favor? Yes, Bidemi said nervously, wringing her hands. It's about Ao, my husband. Things have been so hard for us. He lost everything. I was wondering, maybe you could help him. Maybe you know someone who can connect him to a job or something. Titi's face hardened. She stood up abruptly. Help your husband, she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. Titi, please, Bidemi continued desperately. You're doing so well. I don't have anyone else to turn to. Please, just help me get him back on his feet. I know it's a lot to ask, but... Titi laughed bitterly and shook her head. You must be joking, Bidemi. After what your mother did to me, you think I owe you anything? Bidemi blinked, confused. What are you talking about? My mother. Titi took a step closer, her eyes flashing with anger. Years ago, after you got married, was in need of help. I was in school, struggling to make ends meet. I needed your help. I tried calling you but it wasn't going, so I came to your house, but unfortunately your mother met me at the front of your gate. Your dear mother chased me away. She humiliated me in front of everyone, called me names, and accused me of trying to steal your husband. She made me feel worthless. You don't know how it feels to be labeled as a beggar. What? Bidemi gasped, stepping back in disbelief. It's a lie, my mother would never. Yes. Your mother did, Titi replied, her voice bitter. She called me a leech, a beggar, even a prostitute. Bidemi shook her head, her voice trembling. Titi, I swear I didn't know. Of course, you didn't know. Titi snapped. But it doesn't matter now. That day, I swore I'd never come near you again and I will cut off my friendship with you, and I kept that promise. Titi, please, Bidemi said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know. If I had known, I would have stopped her. I'm so sorry. Please, forgive me. Don't punish me for something I didn't do. Titi looked at her with pity but also resolve. It's too late, Bidemi. I've moved on. I have no place for you in my life anymore. Titi walked away, leaving Bidemi standing there, her heart heavy with guilt and confusion. Bidemi rushed to her mother's house, her mind racing. She burst through the door and found Mama Tinu peeling yam in the kitchen. Mama, what did you do? Bidemi shouted, her voice trembling with anger. Mama Tinu looked up, startled. What are you talking about? Titi. My best friend, Titi. She told me everything. How could you insult her like that? How could you chase her away when she came to me for help? Mama Tinu's face darkened. So, she told you, she muttered, dropping the yam into a bowl. Good. I did what I did to protect you then. Protect me? Bidemi yelled. From what? From my own friend. Mama Tinu straightened, her eyes cold. She was desperate, Bidemi. Desperate women do foolish things. I saw the way she looked at Ao. I wasn't going to let her come between you two. So, yes, I chased her away. But now I'm regretting it. Bidemi's hands trembled as tears filled her eyes. Mama, Titi was my friend. She needed my help. And now, because of you, she won't even look at me. She thinks I betrayed her. Mama Tinu's expression faltered. I only wanted what was best for you, Bidemi. Bidemi shook her head, her chest heaving with frustration. Mama, don't you see what you've done? Your actions didn't protect me. They've only brought me pain. You've pushed away a friend who cared about me. Mama Tinu opened her mouth to respond but stopped, perhaps realizing the weight of her daughter's words. She turned away, silent. That night Bidemi returned home and sat alone, replaying the events in her mind. Her heart ached for the friendship she'd lost, for the trust that had been broken because of her mother's actions. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she resolved to make amends. The next morning, she wrote Titi a long letter, pouring out her heart and apologizing for everything. Whether Titi would forgive her or not, Bidemi knew she had to try. Days later, she received a response. Titi's words were harsh but honest. While she didn't promise to rekindle their friendship, she appreciated Bidemi's apology.